Hello, and welcome to our presentation about the negative effects of the Industrial Revolution. Between the mid-1700s and early 1900s, Britain, and later all of the Western world, experienced a huge change in industry and the production of goods, known as the Industrial Revolution. While the Industrial Revolution did have some positive effects, much of the process was negative. The Industrial Revolution was a primarily negative force in human history because it dramatically increased pollution, led to poor working and living conditions, and utilized child labor. One negative effect of the Industrial Revolution was a rampant increase in the number of child laborers. When many families moved to cities with the thought of improving their lives, they put every child to work. Some children started working as young as 3 years old. Many factories liked to hire children because of their small sizes and their ability to fit in tight spaces. They also thought it was easier to control children than grown men. The poor conditions in the factories and other workplaces caused both physical and mental harm to the young children who were forced to work there. Children were verbally abused, and no precautions were taken to keep them safe. A common example of negligent treatment of young factory workers was a punishment often used for latecomers known as waiting, where a child would have to walk around the factory while having a very heavy weight tied to his or her neck. The workdays were taxing, and children would have to sometimes put in 10 to 16 hours of work with only an hour's break to eat. Some children who lived in particularly poor circumstances were bound to the factories at which they worked and were sometimes locked up at night. Machines were unsafe for children to operate and caused several amputations and even some deaths. And along with the pollution caused by all the new factories, children were exposed to toxic chemicals which caused long-term illnesses and diseases. Movements were eventually made to regulate the amount of hours that children could work per day and more, but these regulations came out only after the injuries and deaths of scores of children. In summary, the low incomes of families who moved to cities during the Industrial Revolution meant that children had to work. Children were desirable as factory workers because they were small and able to perform difficult jobs. Children were also desirable because they were easier to control than adults, but they suffered mental and physical abuse in factories and were often harmed by heavy machinery and unsafe conditions, as well as the toxic chemicals that were used in many of the factories. Another negative consequence of the Industrial Revolution was the increase of pollution. Initially, industrial activity was limited to areas that could provide water power, but over time, factories turned to coal as the primary source of power. The smoke emitted by the burning of coal had devastating effects on the quality of air and the health of residents of growing cities. In 1948, severe industrial air pollution created a deadly smog that suffocated 20 people in Donora, Pennsylvania, and made 7,000 more sick. Later, in 1952, pollutants from factories, along with air condensation, resulted in one of the greatest air pollution disasters in history. Known as the Great Smog of London, the air pollution killed over 4,000 people in several days. Acid rain was another problem that emerged during the Industrial Revolution. First discovered in the 1850s, acid rain was caused by pollution and plagued both people and the environment, including rivers, soil, and forests. Water pollution was also a prevalent problem resulting from the Industrial Revolution. Rivers passing through urbanized areas were often contaminated by waste products and sewage. These contaminated waters carried deadly diseases such as cholera and typhoid, and outbreaks in cities such as London or Paris were not uncommon. As the pace of industrialization increased, factories began disposing of their waste products into rivers, further contaminating the water. In 1969, Ohio's Cuyahoga River, polluted with chemical waste, burst into flames, representing the detrimental effects of industrialization on public safety and on the environment. Rain runoff from oil slick roads, construction, mining, or dump sites, as well as pesticides and fertilizers also contaminate groundwater, which is often used as drinking water. Despite attempts by Congress, Parliament, and other national governments to restrict industries and control pollution, such as Congress's Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act, pollution from these established routines of industry continued to plague our society. Thus, the pollution caused by the Industrial Revolution not only harms the natural environment, but it also causes devastating effects on human health. A third negative result of the Industrial Revolution was a decrease in the standard of working and living conditions for the people of the working class in industrial societies everywhere. The pervasive capitalist nature of the Industrial Revolution caused employers to keep wages low in order to reduce costs and maximize profits, and therefore the quality of living of many sharply decreased. Factory workers, a new social class spawned by the Industrial Revolution, were at the bottom of the social pyramid, forced by their own poverty to live in the worst parts of city and unable to increase their social standing, often living in hunger and filth. Living conditions were so bad in cities that the government set up poorhouses that housed the city's most destitute. Families living in poorhouses were split up, and the houses themselves operated in a similar fashion to prisons, locking up their workers. Moreover, factory laborers worked long hours, often exhausted, and could not engage in recreation. Industrialization eliminated many of the traditional festivals that used to bring people together in order to make sure that no workers could even think of leaving their jobs. A doctor in Manchester voiced his opinion about the living conditions in the urban areas of London, saying, "Whole streets, unpaved and without drains or main sewers, are worn into deep ruts and holes in which water constantly stagnates, and are so covered with refuse and excrement as to be impassable from depth of mud and intolerable stench." In addition to terrible living conditions, factory work was boring, dangerous, and degrading, and often caused physical deterioration of the populace. The initial flock of workers to cities at the start of the Industrial Revolution caused great unemployment and poverty among the masses. Factory employers restricted job benefits and lowered wages when workers were injured, and they were not provided with compensation or medical care, and their pay was ceased. In England, workers were denied the right to vote, and in 1799 and 1800 Parliament passed the Combination Acts, which made it illegal for workers to unionize and demand better working conditions. Workers labored for more than a dozen hours per day and were given no holidays or vacations. All these factors made life very difficult for factory workers and their families, demonstrating how working and living conditions initially decreased among the working class as a result of the Industrial Revolution. In conclusion, increased population, poor working and living conditions, and child labor were all negative effects of the Industrial Revolution. While the pace of improvement increased many decades after the beginning of the revolution, the first 60 years epitomized the horrors it caused.